So I've been working on a project with DFT, and I've been doing that out of my role as a Senior Technical Fellow in Digital Twins and Interoperability from the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. Now, where does this project fit into the overall Department for Transport? So this project focused on looking at two use cases with regards to what they're trying to achieve, and specifically looking at them through the context of data interoperability and integration. One of the key enabling blocks for this, of what they're trying to achieve, is how they go about managing their information to ultimately make decisions to drive optimizations and best practices for what they're trying to achieve. So the two use cases we were requested to focus on was around multimodal network management, which is around how actually all of these different modes working together are often treated in silos, or kind of there's not the level of interoperability where you can optimize the network as a holistic whole rather than just the individual parts. So really looking at the management of that, especially with regards to critical national infrastructure, of if we can't travel down the M1, are more people going to take rail and what's the impact of that, which also then starts to look at some of the environmental and social impacts, as well as these network restrictions I've just mentioned. The other aspect of that is then the crisis management around actually when things occur, such as events that are detailed within the National Risk Register, how do we cope, how do we react, and how do we pre-plan to enable our overall transport network to manage that risk effectively with the right level of resilience and be able to adapt and respond to those sorts of events. So transport is really complex, as most sectors are, but in particular within transport, there's lots of different modes, lots of different parts of infrastructure, lots of different types of vehicles that get used, especially as now we're looking more towards autonomous vehicles and what effect that's having on the network. Operations and prediction across all these modes is really difficult. And then also when we look towards active travel and micromobility and vulnerable road users, there's lots of things that need to be taken into consideration for these sorts of aspects as we start to analyze this from an information management perspective. Now, the big problem around interoperability is many of these systems, through no fault of their own, are looking more at how do we start to mandate particular structures are used within each of these platforms. So this is not an exhaustive list, this is just a flavor of the sorts of things that go off. And for anybody who's familiar with these sorts of data models and structures, this is often focused around sort of structural interoperability or syntactic interoperability, where as long as you're calling it the same thing, I'm happy that we're representing the same thing. But really, that's not good enough. And what we're saying, we can move forward with how we manage our information effectively if we can get behind what we're actually representing to ensure consistency. This is where ontologies comes in. This is where actually the broad field is semantic interoperability. Now, one of the UK programs looking at advancing semantic interoperability is the National Digital Twin Programme. And they've been working on a foundation data model called IES4. And this is looking at actually how do we have a top structure that starts to pin and have consistency for some of the extensions that need to be made. Now, one of the commitments they make within that model is that it categorically tries to model everything. And within that sort of field of influence and extensions that can be made is that you can build out to any part of the domain that you like. So whilst it has general things like persons and organizations and locations, transport needs more than that. It needs all the different types of vehicles, all the different types of roads. So we can build down and produce these local extensions. And that's what we've been doing with the sort of DFT community and transport community as a whole. So when we've got all of the HTMLs, APIs, PDFs available, and you want to try and produce a reference data library, you need a process. Now, there are a few different processes available, but in particular, because IES and many of the other models that we are in this space, known as 4D models, they're all based on Borrow. And Borrow does have a process called Be Clearer. Other processes are available. But here, what we often find is that actually you end up with these mismatch of current practices around. We don't even know what data standards we use. Is it even the right one? Does it achieve what I need? And this is the current situation for many organizations. And what we're seeing is then this process can take us forward and go, actually, if we can take what you've got, the schemas, the metadata, the documents, ideally the data, but that's the part that people often forget. Show me the actual data using this data model so we can understand how it's actively being used. Load that into tables and then evolve that into something that is computer understandable as well as people understandable. And at that point, which is where we're at now, and the reason for presenting today, is to actually then start addressing data quality. Once we've understood how the computer is understanding it, does this data model currently achieve what you need to do? And that's part of engaging with subject matter experts to go, can it actually achieve what you need it to achieve? We don't start with asking experts and desktop exercises. We understand this and follow this process to try and achieve better overall quality. At the end, then, you get this shared model and you get the outcome of going, right, we've got the ontology that can be used to help drive forward our information management practices. And that's what IES and similar foundation models gives us in this case. Now, one of the things with ontologies is that they are often really hard to visualize, especially when you've got multiple parents. So when you're dealing with these structures, you often have to show them piece by piece as it moves down. But one of the solutions we have been exploring is by Chiasm, called OntoChi, and that's giving us that just lens and way of validating the model with experts. So on the left-hand side, you can see sort of the full structure as it goes down, and on the right-hand side, just a short example of where it's good is it really shows you the taxonomy and short sections where you can see like all the different types of specialisms of road with the descriptions and subclasses of it. Now, just as a further example, this is all produced by what is computer understandable using RDFS, which then generates the visualization. So again, it's computer readable first, that allows us then to interrogate the model as useful for information practices, ultimately to try and make decisions. And that's really where we're heading with this now, is to enable end stakeholders to come in, use it, and look at how they would use this with instance data and actual real life information that does actually exist. I can't emphasize that enough, to try and say, does this ontology support what you're trying to achieve? So how can you help? This is a call to action for everyone, is if you're working in the transport domain as an expert, or you're utilizing ontologies, data knowledge graphs within transport, and you'd like early access to what we've done with the ontology, then please get in touch. We've got the first event happening today at 3 o'clock as an introduction to the ontology, as a longer deep dive session. So please drop me an email just with a little bit of your expertise. And really what we're looking for there is, how does this ontology differ compared to your current sources? Does it make it better or worse? Does it fit to your purposes? And do you have examples that would actually help bolster the documentation of how you're going forward? Happy to take questions as after the second presentation. Thank you much for listening.
Jonathan, our first questions to you is, was the OpenStreetMap RDF endpoint of any use or influence in the transport ontology?
Yeah, great question. It turns out it wasn't used in the end because a lot of the OpenStreetMap is just dictionary definitions. So without the actual underlying representation, it's hard to include in a formal ontology. So a lot of the product can't be used, or slash in its current state needs more analysis with more instance data to actually drive that process.
Very good. Link question to yourself here, Jonathan, again, is your work is brilliant. Can anyone join your 3 p.m. teaching today? If so, could you share the details?
So if you are actively working in the transport domain or using data models in transport, then please get in touch. If you're outside of that domain, drop me a line anyway, because we may have some flexibility in how wide we cast that net if you've got some experience. But yes, we are trying to be as open as we can within that session.
Very good. A question from Al here is your work being used to inform the TRIB roadmap development within DFT? Jonathan?
Yes, it is. This is for the next phase of the TRIB roadmap. So it's currently being refreshed, and part of this is informing the future approach for how they are looking at decision making within transport. So one of the things that the work is doing is, despite being funded by DFT, this is going to be open access to help bolster the whole transport community around adoption of this technology. So help and inform TRIB to help inform the wider network around transport.
Thank you. And that links to the second question just below that of, is this also aligned with the innovating for a pandemic resilient public transport system as well?
Not directly, but we have been engaging with CPC, of course, during this engagement.
Great, thank you. And final question that's come through here, and then if we might go back to yourself and see if we can have a quick demonstration of the website, if that works. Is great to see the use of IES4 as part of TRIB. IES4 seems to be getting bigger and bigger. What plans are there to put this into a formal standard? Good question from BSI.
So the way to do this is to make sure that it works first, and that's what we're still assessing. So we're not preemptively standardizing like some standards do, before it's actually actively used. So we're looking at that sort of approach. What's also happening with IES is that we're separating out the layers. So the core with the sort of top 10 entities, the sort of the middle of people and persons into more of the sort of main aspects of it, and then the current background for where the IES4s come from with defense and security is looking at the separation of that into just a reference data library. That also means then transport can be more easily supported as these different extensions go, as well as infrastructure, manufacturing, or different things. We're also then exploring the interoperability between the approaches and looking at those commitments made to ensure that we've got consistency right across the model. So as and when appropriate, maybe it comes out as a flex or a PAS to start with, but certainly looking towards that approach, potentially even as part of 21838.